Hello and welcome to Outnumbered the Podcast. I'm Audrey.
And I'm Bonnie. We are experienced moms to a combined total of 19 children.
In our weekly episodes, we explore relatable topics using our perspectives of humor and chaos.
Tune in for advice and encouragement to gain more joy in your parenting journey.
Hey everybody, we are back with another episode on helping us get to know ourselves and our kids better. We're really excited to dive into this topic of birth order today.
I can't believe that we have been doing our podcast for 3 years and we've never talked about this topic before because it's so fascinating. And Audrey and I refer to it along with other personality traits when we talk about our kids a lot. So we're excited to do this one.
Yeah, this is going to be really fun.
First, I wanted to start with a funny little experience. When we first talked about this episode, Audrey said, you have to go check out this Instagram account. We'll include it in the show notes, but the handle is TJ_Therian. I think you pronounce his last name. And he does tons and tons of videos, just humorous videos about birth order. And I was dying. Like, I watched it for like 45 minutes, just all his different videos. And I'm texting him to my mom and my siblings, of course, because we're like, yes, that's me. Yes, look at this is you. This is you. It's so funny. You know, as adults, you can see all this from your childhood. And so I'm the oldest. We're going to talk a lot about our own birth orders. Yes. I'm the oldest. And so naturally his firstborn videos were killing me because I'm like, this is my life. This is one in particular that I loved was it was showing an example of a firstborn playing a video game online with a bunch of middle children. So you can imagine how this went, right? The guy gets on the game and he's like, all right, guys, follow me. We're headed this direction. No, not that way. Not that way. Pay attention. Okay. Guys, can you be serious for 1 minute, please? Like, it's just so high strung, so type A. We're going to get there and get it done. And everyone's just laughing and being goofs. And it's like, story of my life, especially with my brother. always. So you guys got to go check him out. We'll put it in the show notes.
Oh, yes. I am a middle child. I'm the second born and I am a middle child. So,
and that's why we've worked together for 3 years with zero conflicts because oldest children and middle children just get along so well.
I know it. Well, as you longtime listeners know, we like to educate ourselves on different personality inputs so that we can be better parents to our kids and we can understand ourselves better. And so this is just another tool that we have. We have talked about so many different ones. Maybe we'll link some of those in the show notes. You know, we've talked about love languages. We've talked about personality types. We've talked about your Enneagram type. So just a lot of different tools that you can use to learn about your kids and their unique traits and yourself and your unique traits. So today, that is what we are discussing. With that in mind, we're discussing birth order.
Yes, and it's so important to remember that none of these are hard and fast rules. I mean, some people would say there's no science behind it. We disagree, but it's important to just use it as information that could help you. Won't hurt, might help. Not necessarily conclusive results about how your kid's going to turn out either. So in doing a little bit of research, we found out that birth order theory was developed in the 20th century. And the theory claims, obviously, that the order in which a child comes into a family really distinctively shapes their development and their personality. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's not the only factor in what makes a person who they are, but it's fun to see the commonalities in our different kids and in our siblings and in ourselves. You know, the studies are kind of all over the place, but there seems to be enough general agreement that you can really pick yourself out or you can really understand a kid better by knowing a few things about birth orders.
Yeah, and an interesting thought is how much birth order shapes who you would have been anyway, right? I really believe that I would have been, in large part, the type of personality that I am, even if I had been a middle child, but I might have been a little bit more placid about it. I might have been, you know what I mean? It might have shaped me in just a little bit different way. So you will see, so let's say, for example, the Enneagram that we've talked about a couple of times, you'll see those different Enneagram types in all birth orders, but you might see a few more of the high achievers as firstborns and a few more of the peacekeepers in the middle, etc. So it's just very fascinating to think about. We use it as a tool to understand ourselves and our kids a little bit better and to give them a little bit more grace. So when they're acting a certain way, we might think, this is how they tick. And it might be in large part due to the birth order. Things like their behavior, obviously, their thoughts, their motivation, which is a huge one. Understanding your children's motivation can go a long way in better understanding their behavior and their misbehavior as well.
Yeah. Yes, yes. And there are things that, okay, so just real quick, you guys probably know, everybody probably knows birth order. It's kind of obvious, but the firstborn is the oldest child, the one that's born first. And then a middle child is all the children between the firstborn and the youngest one. And then obviously the youngest child. And then there's also an only child phenomenon thing going on out there. But it's not necessarily hard and true. There are things that affect birth order traits. Like if, for example, you would think that Bonnie and I have a firstborn, a lastborn, and about a billion middle child in the middle. But that's not true, because there are things that affect birth order. So if you have a bunch of girls and then you have a boy, he's going to have more of those firstborn traits because he is the first boy. So there's other things that affect it. If you have, 3 or 4 kids and then there's a gap and then later you have another kid or two, then that will affect which birth order they're in. Yeah, and then another thing is, like, in large families, they kind of have different, like, you don't have a bunch of a bunch of middle kids. There are definite differences that and traits that they pick up depending on where they are in that large family. So it's not hard and fast, but it is enough. There's enough evidence in it that we can use it to help us understand our kids.
Yes, in a large family, it's kind of a fun exercise to look around and just think, I think you're acting right here as the firstborn because of this scenario or that scenario,
Yeah.
and fun to kind of pick those different traits out, right? Um, a few other things that can affect birth order are sets of twins. So, twins tend to get special attention from parents and from strangers as well. And so the experts say that the rules don't necessarily apply to twins, which is pretty interesting. They don't function as one personality, obviously, and they don't necessarily follow the older younger because they were born on the same day and they're treated differently. So that's an interesting caveat.
Yeah. So maybe after your twins, if you were born and you have an older set of twins, maybe you are more like a firstborn again.
Yeah.
It's just kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go through each of these specifically, each of these different positions in the family. We're going to talk about benefits and disadvantages and what they look like as adults. And then we're going to share some examples that we have from our own families and our own, where we were in the birth order and people we know and that kind of thing. So this is just going to be kind of a fun episode. All right, starting, of course, with the firstborn, the oldest child, the benefits. You have your parents to yourself, all to yourself for a period of time. So this means extra attention. Some theories claim that the firstborn are more intelligent, and it does kind of, yeah, all right, Bonnie, yes, take a bow.
Hey, I'm gonna lay claim to all the positive and none of the
Yeah.
negative. All right.
Sure. Yeah, you do that. They have more developed speech. Some of these things kind of make sense. They're getting all their parents' attention. Of course, they're going to talk with a more developed speech than younger kids. They score high on the aspect of extroversion, the aspect of extroversion known as dominance. They're very responsible, determined. They tend to be rule followers, cautious, and they have a very high level of autonomy. So you need it done, they're just going to figure out how to do it and do it.
Yeah, interesting. And we would love to hear this when we're going to talk about this on Instagram. When this episode goes live, we would love to hear your feedback. If you think this follows the trends you've seen in your own family or your current nuclear family or your family of origin, I'd love to know if people think that this is true or not, because I definitely see a lot of those traits in myself and my own firstborn child. So a few disadvantages that some of these oldest children might encounter is that parents expect a lot, right? If they're the only child for a while or they're the first to reach certain milestones, the parents are going to expect more, which is kind of interesting. I didn't realize what I was doing, but when my oldest was a baby, I was just so excited for each phase to come that I pushed him a lot. And now looking back, I'm thinking, didn't I realize just how fast he was going to grow up? Couldn't I have just held on? But I didn't know that until I had a little bit of experience. So I remember thinking, okay, you got the sitting down. Now when are you going to crawl? It's time to crawl. It's time to crawl. Okay, you crawl. Now it's time to walk. Now we're going to walk. Like everything was so new and novel and exciting that I just couldn't wait to. So a lot of that push, right? So a lot of expectation. The parents might seem stricter because they are youthful and exuberant and have read all the parenting books and have all the answers. So that firstborn child, he gets to break those parents in, right? And then the oldest needs to set an example for the next children. So again, high expectations on that child. be an example for those younger kids. Studies have shown sometimes they have lower birth weight. Isn't that interesting?
That
Maybe
is so
the
interesting.
mom's body has to like adapt to being pregnant or something. Who knows? They tend to be bossy. Unsurprisingly, they tend to be a little bossy, right? Because they're the oldest and in charge. And they also tend to have higher blood pressure, probably just because they're stressed out about, about all the pressure on them. So, those are
Uh,
some of the not so great features that you might have to encounter as an oldest child.
isn't that interesting that it even is seen across health things like that?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah.
Okay, so the firstborn child, what do they look like as an adult? Definitely leaders. They have leadership skills in wherever they work. They tend to take a leadership role. They teachers. Oftentimes they're teachers. They're goal oriented, very outspoken, independent, perfectionist, and they're high in conscientiousness, looking around, seeing what needs to go on, what other people need. Role models, hard workers, timely, definitely on time to work. And interestingly enough, they make more money.
Interesting, interesting. And that is super duper interesting. And it would be so fascinating to find out what some of these big CEOs that we follow, like Jeff Bezos or whatever, like where they fall in their family, right? And if this follows suit.
And
So an example,
presidents, like how many presidents were
yeah,
firstborn children?
right. Or just big thinkers,
Yeah.
artistic, whatever. Okay, so an example I wanted to share about this is one time I was getting together with a bunch of homeschool moms. There was probably 20, 25 of us, and we were all sitting around in a circle trying to get to know each other a little bit better. And one of these women was very into birth order, personality types, etc. And she goes, I have a theory and I would love to see if I'm right. Can we all go around and tell what birth order we were in our family of origin? So we all went around, and interestingly enough, probably 70% of us were the firstborn child. And we thought, oh,
Oh,
that's so interesting. And then we poked around and probed a little bit further and found out that the rest of them, the other 30%, were like acting firstborn. So they were either the
okay.
oldest daughter or they were the oldest after a large gap in
Hmm.
their family. I think there was maybe one exception in that entire group. And we were just floored. We thought, oh my gosh, there's something to this. Because something about being that oldest or that acting oldest often pulled people into homeschooling. It was like, well, I can do this better than the school system or something, whatever is going through our brain. And got them to the situation where we would be in this homeschool group together. So we just thought it was so fascinating, and that we all came from really similar backgrounds. That applies to me. And I've also noticed that um, we tend to be perceived as high achievers, right? We get a lot of things done. We're productive. But there is both a light and a dark side to this, right? Many people think, in fact, usually when I get compliments from people, it's something along the lines of, "You do so much," right? Oh, that's amazing that you do this and this and this and this and this and this. But I don't know if you noticed, doing is not is not the primary purpose of life. And sometimes this obsession with accomplishments or achieving gets in the way of things that are more important, like relationships or rest, sleep, these other things. So if you ever feel a little jealous of younger children, or what a different birth order, go talk to a couple of them. There are pros and cons to each one. So I just had to share that, because that's something I have learned as an adult is, oh, how can I harness these strengths and combat them when they really interfere with my life?
Yeah, yeah. So my husband is not the firstborn. He has three older sisters, but he is the first boy.
First
And
son.
so he
Okay.
does have quite a few of the firstborn child traits, which is interesting.
Yes.
Very
And
interesting. He was also the youngest child for 12 years before his brother came along. So interestingly enough, he has quite a few of these oldest traits and some of the youngest child traits, which
that
is
is
very
very
funny.
interesting. And interesting that he is an kind of an acting oldest who married a middle child, and
Mhm.
I am the oldest and also married a middle child.
Okay,
My
okay.
husband, he comes from a large family, but he is almost smack dab in the middle and has lots of these middle child traits. So it's so fascinating.
Okay, yes, let's talk about the middle child. I'm ready to talk about middle children now. So, the middle child, some benefits are we are peacekeepers. We've got to keep the peace between the oldest and the youngest, we enjoy negotiation and compromise. The middle child relates to people of different ages with ease. They're used to interacting with older and younger, not super have to be just people their age. They are very agreeable, goes along with the negotiation and being the peacekeeper. They have a high level of openness, and that what that means is that they are flexible, like super flexible and adaptive, open to different ideas, diplomatic, nurturing, very introspective, and they can be tentative, and they tend to be more creative types. So all those are middle child benefits. Kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, I can see like almost all of those in you. Isn't that fun to explore a little bit?
Uh,
Okay, so there are a few disadvantages, of course. For middle children, they can struggle to seek out their own specific niche, right? Like where they belong in the family, especially if it's a larger family, and not just oldest, middle, youngest, right? Not everyone has three children. To try to figure out where they belong. They can be competitive with an older sibling, right? Or interestingly enough, they actually might rebel and act a little bit more naughty, maybe to get attention. I don't know. Studies have shown they have an increased risk of hospitalization due to avoidable accidents. this this a lot of this might be for the boy middle children, right? So
yeah.
we there were five kids in my family. I was the oldest and very much an oldest child. The second was a boy, and he was very much had some of these wild boy middle children traits. And it's fun to see, especially in this Instagram account you were sharing, Audrey. He pops up a lot in those middle child traits. I was sending them all to him, cracking up because it's so funny. Um, they rebel, like we mentioned. They try to find a way to get attention. Sometimes humor is a big one. They laugh a lot. They might even struggle with some self-esteem issues. My second child is very much this one as well. The oldest, he lets be the type A high achiever, and he just is he's the class clown of our homeschool class.
Yes, I have to make a public apology to my mom, because when I was a kid, I used to say, "Well, my older sister's the oldest, so you love her, and my youngest sister is the youngest, so you love her, and my brother is the only boy, so you love him. But here I am. I'm the middle child. I'm nothing. You have no reason to love me." And she'd say, "Honey, I love you because you're you." But that was like, no, nope, there's nothing special about me. So that part
Aw.
about, like having a hard time finding your place is definitely something I could relate to from when I was a kid.
No, sweet thing.
Interestingly enough, I try to, pay a little special attention to my middle kids as a result, and let them know ways that I do like really appreciate them, ways that they're special, and they don't have, just automatically that oldest or that youngest thing going on. So
Mm-hmm.
okay, what does that middle child look like as an adult? They're adaptable, no surprise, they grew up doing that, right? Sometimes they're a social butterfly, they get along, they know how to relate to so many different people. Dreamers, generous, creative, rebellious, competitive, funny, and a great negotiator. So I don't know what kind of careers a middle child might go into. um, I don't know. But go ahead.
I was gonna say probably artistic, maybe speech and debate type of things, maybe
Right.
attorneys, maybe politicians.
Mhm.
My brother went into political science, and yeah, I could always see that in him, that he was just a great debater, a great negotiator, great at getting people to see each other's sides. Pretty cool. Few examples of these is that, once again, like we said, these might come out multiple times in a large family. It might originally come out in the second child, and then again later on down the line, as there's another acting oldest and another acting middle. It's just kind of fun to pull them out. They often have a very different personality type than the oldest, as we've seen this. And like I mentioned, my husband and I work really, really well together, because he is definitely an acting middle child, and he is more of the peaceful type, he is unflappable. It takes so much to get his goat. In fact, sometimes as a very passionate person, I'm like, would you just get angry about something already? I gave up trying to argue with him years ago, because I just have to get something out, and I would just rant and rave, and he'd go, "Are you done? Can we move on now?" And I'm like, come on, let's get a debate going. Let's talk about this. And he just wanted the peace. So it has worked out in our benefit, that's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, sometimes what you'll see when you have multiple middle children is one will be like the negotiator in the family, and then the next one will be like the rebellious
The
one in the
rebel,
family.
yes,
And
totally.
then the
Mhm.
next one will be like the funny guy in the family.
Yes.
So you'll
Yeah.
get multiple different middle children like trying to find their own role.
Yeah. Yeah. And while this will mold our children and ourselves as we grow up, we also have to allow for a lot of change when they leave the home, right? They
Yeah.
may leave and realize, I was always trying to be the funny guy because I felt like I needed that attention, but I don't really like that anymore, and to kind
Yeah.
of morph and change and to not hold your kids to this standard of who they were when they were 10 and 11. And that's hard because that's part of what you love about them, right? But they will change and grow up and morph and become a different version of that fabulous child that you loved when they were little.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, moving on to the youngest child, so the baby of the family. It seems like there's two paths that the youngest child takes. They either have a clear journey to success in front of them, their way is paved, they're the baby, everybody's setting things up for them, or they kind of become avoidant, like the artist, the lazy, the still sleeping in their mom's basement at 30 or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Uh, but here's more younger child benefits. They definitely have freedoms the older siblings don't have because mom and dad figured out that way of parenting where they were kind of the helicopter parent that really wasn't like totally necessary. And so they backed off a little bit, relaxed a little bit. They're older, maybe more chilled out. Younger children are also creative, rebellious, very outgoing. And one thing youngest children have for them is they're very assured of their place in the family. They're the baby, they're petted. It's kind of this youngest child thing going on. They will never be displaced by a younger sibling. So there's like a confidence that comes with that. They have a reputation for being happy go lucky, usually extroverted. Interestingly enough, they've got other siblings. So always interacting with someone else maybe gives them more tendency toward extroversion, charismatic, and very intuitive.
Dang, that makes me want to be a youngest child. That's all kinds of good things.
Yeah.
There are a few disadvantages, including studies say that they may struggle with mental health during puberty and young adulthood. And I wonder if that's as they grow up and start to find their place in the world, maybe it's a little bit
Yeah.
less clear, right?
Yeah.
Then,
Not being the baby anymore,
yeah,
having
maybe the
to
world
grow
is
out of
not
the
treating
baby.
them. Yeah, the world's not treating them like mom and dad did.
Yeah.
They're like, dang, now what? They are actually more likely to be admitted to the hospital for reasons relating to alcohol. So, sounds like some mental health issues sometimes with those who are younger children. Lower conscientiousness due to fewer responsibilities. So, we can definitely see this happening, right? The children grow up, maybe they have less chores because they're the baby, they get caught a little bit more. And so, maybe they have some higher issues with risk taking, right? They don't learn those lessons early on. So again, not a hard and fast rule, but we see a little bit of that with the younger children.
Yeah. Yep. So, what does the youngest child look like as an adult when they grow up? They can be a risk taker, very outgoing, a lot of dependency on others. They've kind of grown up, you know, being dependent on parents and other people for their who they are. Persistent, fun loving, charming, easygoing, free spirited, and spoiled. Kind of entitled and spoiled. Like they grew up getting everything handed to them, being the sweet baby. And they can be a little spoiled if there's somebody at your work or coworker or somebody neighborhood that's just a little acting like the baby of the family. Probably they were the baby of the family.
Yeah. 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 And that can help us understand roles in workplace, right? Like we,
Huh.
we get out of our little home and start to work with people and we're thinking, why do you act this way? Oh, maybe that has something to do with it. So I am seeing the pros and cons of being the younger children as I parent my younger children, right? And as I age. So my younger children get parents who are calmer. We are more experienced and more mature. So that's wonderful. We're not all high strung and psychotic like my poor oldest child had to deal with when he was little. But that being said, we are also a lot more tired. And I tend to be less disciplined with things for my younger children. I know that I'm not going to make a big deal about my younger children doing some of the things that I did with my older kids, using potty words or this or that, because I'm just tired. And I know that it's not going to be a big deal if the 3-year-old says poopy head, whereas my oldest, oh, let's get out the soap and vinegar. You are in big trouble, mister. So I think some of that is good. We become a little bit more rational as parents, but we get tired, we get less consistent, less disciplined. And so I think that's where some of the spoiling comes in as well. And then we realize it's our last chance to parent, and we don't want to
Right.
do anything that might harm our chances of them coming home at Christmas. We just want to snuggle them all the time.
I know, and especially as, if we're finished having a family and we kind of realize that we're done, we kind of are guilty of hanging on to those last stages.
Yeah.
Oh, you're still my baby,
Here,
not
keep your binky until you're 5. It's
yeah,
fine.
yeah, yeah, not can you go get dressed while I nurse the baby? It's
Right.
like,
Right.
"Oh, let me help you
I'll
get
do it
dressed."
for them. Yeah, I'll do
No.
it. Yeah. Totally. Totally.
I kind of feel like we have two youngest in our family because we have a youngest girl and a youngest boy. And they
Mm.
definitely have a lot of these youngest child traits, both of them, the youngest
Hmm.
girl and the youngest boy in different ways. So that's kind of interesting in a youngest family. We've got two babies of the family.
Yep. Yep.
Okay, now moving on to the last category that Bonnie and I know nothing about. So we're basically just depending on research for
We're
this
winging
one.
it.
There is a category of the only child. So an only child is surrounded by adults. These are the benefits. They're surrounded by adults and they mimic their behavior. They're like little adolescent, little adults. They're intelligent, they're creative, they're ambitious, very independent.
Yes, and you'll probably see a lot of oldest child traits in an only child and a lot of youngest child traits, but not very often the middle child, because those are the ones that are trying to make themselves known. And the only child knows that everybody knows who he is and where he belongs, right? He's the star of the
Yeah.
show.
Yeah.
So a few disadvantages for this only child is that the parents tend to be overprotective. They're the only one. They're putting all their hopes and dreams in you, right? They're not going to let anything happen to this child. They tend to be dependent on the parents for support, probably largely in part because the parents want to support them, right? And they have the means. Like, you got one child, all your money
Right.
and time and energy can go into them.
Yeah.
They're probably not used to sharing. Everything is for them, right? And they may be stubborn or a little bit more set in their ways because they've never had to compromise.
Yeah, yeah. I know that I have said we have a couple friends that have just one child and that, we'll be around him in the child's behavior. And on the way home, I'll just say to my husband, oh, what that child needs is a sibling.
Too bad just ordering a sibling isn't as easy as like ordering a parenting book on Amazon. It just doesn't work that way. It
Oh.
requires a lot more time and effort than just
Mm,
reading up on something.
yes, yes. And then you would lose some of those only child benefits.
That's true. There's a lot of those too. Yep.
Yeah. So, what do they look like as an adult? Very mature, loyal, independent, confident. They're leaders. There is some cautiousness thrown in there. They haven't had a sibling egg them on to go do
Something dumb.
you name it. They're very curious and they're quite sensitive. Not also having had a lot of that sibling, teasing, rivalry, any of that thrown at them, where you kind of learn a lot of this, how to get along with people's skills from your siblings growing up.
Yeah, this is an interesting concept, that of challenges being something that strengthen us and make us a little bit more resilient, right? I'm reading a book right now called The Coddling of the American Mind. Fascinating. Highly recommend it. And they are talking about one example is the fact that peanut allergies are on the rise and have been for probably 20 years or so. And that it actually came about because families, parents, teachers were instructed to start restricting peanuts from children because they were seeing a slight rise in allergies. And what happened? The allergies spiked because then the immune systems were not able to say, oh no, this peanut protein is actually not a danger. Do not freak out, right? So consequently, an only child might not have some of these same challenges that come from a sibling being a total jerk to them, right? So this is something that can really help those of us who have multiple children to understand it's okay. Like, yes, they'll get teased and beat up and made fun of by each other, but they'll also have each other to rally around, and they will, gain resilience, whatever. And then some of the pros to being an only child is they can go out and get that from friends. They can have a lot more probably sports and being out in the real world than those of us that are stuck at home with kids. So it's just an interesting concept of those challenges being what make our children stronger.
Yes.
Okay, I have noticed that everyone likes to think that only children are just always spoiled and entitled. But I do not think that's true. And I have seen only children who are all over the board when it comes to personalities, right? Just goes to show that being an only child is not going to make you one specific personality type. I think it is a combination of who the child is innately outside of their nurturing environment, in combination with how they're parented. And some parents are very indulgent with an only child, and some are not. Some are very conscious that they don't want their child to be spoiled, and so they are very conscious of giving their child those challenges that they need to succeed. So, I mean, if you've got an only child and you're worried about that, it's not a foregone conclusion. You get to control a lot of that through your parenting as well.
Yeah, like a lot of only children, maybe they have a cousin, a family with a bunch of cousins, and they get that some of that sibling
Yeah.
experience with
Hmm.
that as well. There's a lot of factors that come into play. So, studies done on how birth order affects many different types of life. They're just kind of fun to look into. Like if you are really noticing or maybe struggling with a child and trying to deal with them, they have shown there's studies that show how birth order affects health, how it affects careers, how it affects economic status, finances, relationships, all that kind of thing. So they're like we're just kind of grazing the surface here, picking and choosing some of the most common things, but you can dig in a lot deeper and find a lot more information about birth order out there.
Yeah, and if you have a child that you consistently butt heads with, this might be an easy way to look into why you are struggling. Maybe it's because the two of you have very different birth orders, right? Like I have it's very easy for me to parent my oldest child because I know exactly what motivates him. I know exactly what he I mean, we just have similar personality types anyway. But some of my younger children, my middle child, and I'm saying my second because that's he's got a really strong middle child tendencies. He's harder for me. He's so enjoyable, but I don't really know what makes him tick because it's not the same as what makes me tick. So that can really help you figure out some of those underlying issues with kids that you don't get yet, you know.
Yeah, yeah, and another thing to watch for is if you're having trouble with a child, look into yourself and say,
Mm,
is there something from one of my siblings that just like hasn't maybe resolved itself yet
yeah.
that I'm seeing, oh, you remind me of my younger sister or of my your older sister or of my, middle brother or whatever it is, and I really struggled with that, and so then maybe you're projecting that onto your child. So it's good to look into yourself too and see how your experience in your bir- family of origin is affecting your nuclear family.
Yes, I love that you brought that up. I actually have several older, retired age people in my life who still struggle with some issues that were created by sibling rivalries. And not to put undue pressure on those of us that are raising children, but to do everything we can to help them resolve that at an early age before it kind of cements into a resentment that lasts for years and years, because that can really damage kids, even self-esteem as you're talking, as they become adults and beyond. So anyway, just a side note about that. There's these families are tricky sometimes. We got to work at them. We're also going to include in the show notes a fun article on how birth order affects marriage, like we've mentioned a little bit here, and friendships too. You might start picking out of your friends. Oh yeah, interesting how she is a middle child and we get along so well, or she's a youngest, or I've noticed that the things that frustrate me about this friend are maybe the things that are different from me, or the things you love about them, right? Because
All right.
they're so much different from you. Pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah, that article is fun because it shows like if you're a middle child and you're married to a youngest child, you know what it explains different things about the
What your
relationship.
challenge is, or
Yes,
yeah.
yes, yeah. Okay, so just once again, we want to say that you guys, this is just a tool that you can use. It's not hard and fast, any of it. There's tons of other inputs that cause us to be the way we are and our kids to be the way they are. But it is a tool that we can use to look at our kids and say, yep, yep. And at ourselves, like maybe, as maybe we have a hard time with something and now we understand, oh, that's because I'm an oldest child and or a youngest child or whatever, and this is why it's making me tick the way I was, especially I can see the challenges if you were an only child and now you have multiple children. You would not understand those dynamics as well either. So once again, we just encourage you always to be educating yourself about different things that help you be a better parent to and to understand yourself better.
Yes, totally. I've also noticed that sometimes these birth orders can shift unexpectedly, right? So you can have an only child. I have a couple of friends that this is the case. They had an only child and then a very long gap between that one and the next one. And then that oldest child really struggles with an identity shift, went from being an only oldest to now an oldest with all these little babies. And, it helps us gain some empathy towards children or adults who have struggled with that kind of displacement or other issues affecting birth order. When studying birth order and personality traits, I try to never use that information to excuse the bad behavior of myself or others, right? Because then we can just walk around going, well,
Yeah.
she can't help it, she's a youngest child,
Yeah.
and I don't
Yeah.
think that's very helpful. But it does help me understand and have some more empathy towards those who are acting in a certain way, especially if it drives me crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. You can also use the traits, like if you know a youngest child is struggling with something, but they're also kind of fun loving, you can use that to kind of motivate them. You know that fun
Yeah,
is one of their motivators, then you can use that after we get done with the work, then we'll go have the fun.
totally. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So we hope this episode has been helpful to you guys. Once again, we ask if you enjoyed it, please share it with others, leave us a review on iTunes, or support the podcast on Patreon. We'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening, friends. Click the link in the show notes to subscribe to our email and never miss another episode.
Show us some love by leaving a review on iTunes or sharing the podcast with a friend. Thanks for all your support. We'll talk to you next week.
I'm off mute now, right? Sorry, I was trying to mute myself
Yeah.
for a sec. Couldn't see my dang button.
You raise your hand. Yes,
That
Bonnie.
is so interesting. Wait.